My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sankaram, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to speak about a very important quote of Swamiji. And here in this quote, he shows how the mind, an ordinary mind and a universal mind. A mind that, an ordinary mind with very limited type of thoughts, and a mind that has got more universal thought. And this is a very important quote, which is in the new edition of his book. You will see on page 18. In the last few satsangs, I spoke about thought, what thought is, and how one, expands the thought, how from thought, ideas, knowledge, wisdom, and how one nurtures, the experiences that we have in this material world, and how we engage the material world. Oftentimes we try to change things from outside to make our lives better. And sometimes it's successful, sometimes, and many times it is not successful. Or, we don't get the outcomes that we want. And many people will try again and again. Others get disappointed. Others, take more drastic steps. And sometimes they don't make it. So, and here we saw how Swamiji says that the change must come from within. The change must come from an inward journey. I mean, slowly, transitioning from the external control to the inner control, inner resources, and how one cultivates that through introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation. And one who practices this intensively, not just during meditation moment. Meditation moment is critical for us to have a selfness time, for us to be with ourselves without anything, that nothingness state, that no thing state, So, but slowly, as we come back to engaging the material world, we engage with an enlightened, illumined mind, that every thought, every experience, every action is illumined by the inner resources or the inner light that we spoke about, or the Paranjyoti, or the Atma, or the big I. And when we infuse everything in this material world with that, we see that our material world becomes more enlightening, more enriching, and more inspirational. Even though it may seem challenging for many, you would still, in those challenges, you're able to see opportunities for learning. In the pressures that normal people go through, you transform that into treasures of enlightenment. In the scars that many people have, you're able to transform that into stars. And what many people find it impossible, you'd always reach out to say, I am possible. And this transition comes from understanding and mastering something that is inherent in all of us, something that nature has imprinted in our DNA, and something that we are part and parcel. But over the course of our lives, we have become more and more external driven species, that we forgot that within us we have something really powerful. And this is the quote that I want to take you through. And this quote is on page 18, that Swamiji, after this intensive tapas, he attained this self-realization or God-realization state. And he, in one of the speeches, and he's written this in the book, he says, I renounced my lands, my house, my kith and my kin, my place and my religion. I've avoided giving birth or taking birth. I've avoided becoming a corpse. At will I remain, at will I end, because I've attained the seat of wisdom. And this is a very profound quote that he had. And when one ponders this very, very deeply, one would ask this question, that Swamiji says, I renounce my lands, talk about property, your material wealth. But Swamiji had a home that he is staying. How can he say that he has given it up, right? A place, locality where you live. Yes, he did not, he was of a particular religion. He gave up that, and then he goes on to say something more profound, which says that I've avoided giving birth, right? But he has a birth certificate. He was born. So how can he say that? And death, or taking birth, and this is and avoiding being a corpse, that means dying. Well, he had death, right? So everybody dies. So for an ordinary person, when they look at this, this sounds very abstract, but when you really look at it very deep, understanding his philosophy and, understanding his experience and what he was documenting here, one needs to think about this very, very deeply. It took me, many years to really research this, intensify this, and get that experience of him to be able to understand what he is saying here. So let me take you through this one, this quote. So when he says I here, what is he speaking about? Is he speaking about the small I, the material I? Or is he speaking about a much more higher order I, the spiritual I, the big I that he talks about, right? So we need to distinguish these two. So let's break this down very, very carefully. Which I is he talking about? This small I, the small I that we're talking about, this material personality that is anchored on this material body, which imprints all these material experiences and builds a material personality. Is he talking about that? Because that material personality goes through changes at every second, at every moment. As long as the material body has got pain, the material mind, the small I, will experience pain. As long as this material body goes through changes, this small I, material I, also goes through changes. As long as this material body has birth, this material mind too has birth. As long as this material body has death, this material mind too has death. This material personality I'm talking about. Is this what he's talking about? Not really, is he? What he's talking about is that, for most people, the material personality is wedded and welded to the material body and the material experiences and the material, all the trappings of this material world. Yes, it's the trappings of the material world. The mind gets trapped into this material, bodily experience. So when there are fluctuations and changes, the material mind also goes through this. Right? Swamiji is not talking about this. He's talking about the big I. He's talking about that which is transcendental to this material universe. That which is the master of the no thing, nothingness, neither matter nor energy, neither is touched by space or time. That which is, when we say space and time, when it is transcendental to time, what does birth means? What does death means? That is, birth and death has got no meaning. Swamiji is talking about this big I. When he says, I renounce my land, he's talking about the big I. So his mind, his personality is anchored not on that material I that is limited. It is on that higher order, infinite possibility and infinite potentiality that is transcendental to space, time, and this material universe. That is the big I he's talking about. Neither does he have, neither that body has birth nor death. So for many people who choose, so which I is he talking about? He's not talking about the small I, the big I. So if we feel the trappings of this material world, it tells you that our mind is still close or anchored to that material world, the material personality. So through this introspection, contemplation, reflection, and being the transcendental in that quiet moment and carrying that transcendentality is what one gives that experience of this material, this spiritual realm. So if you say you are the body, the small I, then you will experience the changes that is happening, the Maya or the transition. Maya means that which continuously changes, the birth and the death cycle, right? So because the mind is wedded and welded to that which is continuously changing. So if you're riding on that which is continuously changing your Maya, your personality will be trapped in that Maya. So this is what that first qualification I want to make. But if you say that my mind is anchored on that big I, on that chariot, on the chariot, the true driver of the chariot, right? And you see that if you say, I am that big I, the Atman or the Paranjoti, right? Then you would be transcendental to both birth and death. You'll be transcendental to change. And this is what Swamiji is talking about. So there's two axioms that one needs to qualify is that the small I and the big I, which is it that you are, experiencing, right? So if you are the big I, now let's come back to the codes. So if we are the big I, and if, Mahan, if you were sitting in Mahan's platform, and if you've experienced that big I, right, in the true meditation state, your material body will be folded into that spiritual realm that you would not feel the reverberation of the material world, the vibration of the material world. When that happens, your name, your position, your title, your bank account, everything disappears, right? Similar to in the deep sleep state, are you so and so, the name given on the IC or your birth certificate, or the owner of the house that you are deeply sleeping in, right? So think about this. So if you are the big I, let's now go through one by one of those quotes that he's saying. He says, I renounce my land, right? Land here is matter and energy, right? So what land is he talking about, right? Does the big I need any matter and energy land to rest on? The material body needs matter and energy, the land, the food, and everything else to sustain. But does the big I or the spiritual or the Atman need anything to rest on? He says that I renounce, I don't need this. My big I, the spiritual I, the Atman does not need a land to be its foundation, to stand. I need nothing to stand on. I need nothing to be present on. The nothing is that the no-thingness, right? And that is what the first line is telling. I renounce my land. He says, I don't need it because I'm transcendental to it. He says, I renounce my house. What house does the big I need? Right? The material body needs a house to shelter it from rain and snow and cold weather and everything else. Right? Everything that is material, coals, heat, everything, the material body is made out of that. So it may need protection from it. But the big I, does it need protection from winter and heat and everything else? Rain, Where does the big I reside? Does the big I reside in anything? Or does everything reside in the big I? So this is the question that one needs to ask. I remember an example which is really interesting, which I had an experience with Mahan in 1980, when Mahan was, I believe it was in the Klang Center, and it was drizzling. And of course, we were, looking after Mahan. And I remember raising the umbrella to, shelter him from the rain. And he pushed the umbrella. And I thought maybe it was an accidental push. So I raised back, I brought the umbrella back, and he pushed it further. And the third time he says, I don't want the umbrella, with a very strong voice. He says, so I was a little bit taken back up. But I saw his shirt, his white shirt was getting wet. So I was a little bit confused. And he told one thing that which then I did not make sense to me. He says, I don't get wet. But for me at that time, I said, well, I'm seeing you getting wet, that what do you mean I'm not getting wet? So, but I didn't ask anything. And so he walked in, and I remember asking my father, somebody was getting wet, but he says, I am not getting wet. Is he okay? He says, no. What he's saying here is that he doesn't distinguish himself from the body, he doesn't associate himself to the body. He's associating himself to that big eye. And he's telling me, and he's giving me a lesson that that eye doesn't get wet. So here it is. And after many years of that conversation, when I looked at this passage, it's my house. He says, I renounce my house. What does that mean? It's this material home that we use to protect, from rain and shine. For Mahan, it really doesn't matter. So he says that, I'm transcendental. Nothing can contain, the spirit doesn't need a home. Everything is contained in that spirit. And that's what this passage is saying. The next one I want to think about, say, how is it I renounce my kith and kin, my family, and so on? So you see that, when we say kith and kin, it is something that is really, in family, parents and all those things. Nature's imprinted these biological relationships so that the species can look after each other, and that love nature is built in to make sure that species have a successful life. So when parents have love for children, they protect them, they feed them, they educate them, and that love continues. And nature's imprinted that in pretty much all the species. And this is also part of this material universe of the successful species have these qualities. And if you have a small eye and you're part of this material universe or material world, you would have that quality too. And one would ask the question, my kith and kin. And here it is that if you look at it very, very carefully, that the inspiration comes that when we are a biological being, we look after our own species. That means people of our own, descendants or family of parents and so on. Right? So there is a special bond that we have. This is part of the small I building that special bond. But if you were a universal personality, say God, would God have any special treatment for anyone? So when you become more and more universal, your kith and kin are very similar to somebody you really don't know, right? So there is no special provision. So there's no special, thing that you provide. So Mahan is here showing that I don't have special treatment for my family. Everybody is one, that universal identity. So, and this is where you see that this great Mahan did not save this knowledge only for his family and the people close to him. He made it access to everyone. And this is the quality of a Mahan or a universal personality. That spiritual being, the divine being, doesn't discriminate anyone. It gives everyone equal. Look at the sun. The sun gives everybody the same radiation, whether dirty water, clean water, everything gets equal treatment. So there is no special treatment. And this is what we see, that a mind that is illumined or inspired by this universal personality becomes universal in its outlook. There's no special. Everything is that special. And this is where you see that it is no more an object-driven speciality, but it becomes a subject-driven universality. And this is what Swamiji is showing. God knows, most people need that family ties to keep them going. He says that, when you are divine, you see that you become self-sustaining and everything becomes one. And this is what that my kith and kin live to outlive everything. The next one is my place. He says, he's referring to the town or location where he is. He says that I have renounced it because I don't need to differentiate myself from I am from Klang, or I'm from Toronto, or I'm from, so and so. He says that, yes, if you are a small I, you need an address, you need a place that identify where you stay. Without an address, you can't get a lot of the services, or you can't, so for many human beings, you need an address to tell you where you belong to, so that information and knowledge. So you have a home with an address, or office with an address. But if you are a big I, what address do you need? You are everywhere. You're omnipresent. What address do you need? What is the location that he's speaking about? Right? There is no particular place. You are everywhere. Right? So I renounce that specificity of that place. I am that universal abode, that universal personality. I don't need a place. There is no place that can accommodate me. I am in every place. This is what he's saying, right? And I'll give you some examples of how, he reflects this. The next one is my religion. He was of a particular religion, very, very strict. But here it is, if you think about it very carefully, religion is to guide you. Proper religious teachings and spiritual teaching is to guide you to the big I. But if I am the big I, is there a need for a guide anymore? Right? So this is what he's asking, right? Think of this way. When you're first learning to drive, you look at the driver's manual, you look at all the traffic symbols, and you've got to read it, and you've got to be conscious and so on. But after many years of driving, it is ingrained in you. It becomes part and parcel of you. Do you still need a manual? Or is it part and parcel of your DNA of the driving without a manual, all the traffic, books, the traffic symbols, right? So this is what the question is asking, is that he says, I have renounced it. I don't need it. I've outlived it, right? It become part of me, you see? So he says that I have renounced it. Is it? The next aspect is very important also, is that I've renounced birth and taking birth. Here it is. I've already given you the essence to this, right? The material body, goes through this cycle of birth, sustenance for a while, in death. It has got this process called metabolism, anabolism, and catabolism. Things are assembled together, it sustains for a while, and then it dissolves, and then it starts, the process cycle starts over and over again. So we see that happening at our cellular level, we see that happening at our bodily level, we see that happening in the universe itself, when galaxies come together, and then suns, create many things, and then they dim off and become a black hole. So we see that imprint in all our material universe. We see that in us too. In this material form, our thoughts emerge, sustain for a while, it dissolve. So does our body. So this is the material I personality, the DNA is built in. But the spiritual personality, the big I, does it have birth and death? It is transcendental to space and time. It's transcendental to time. There is time. Think of a world, there is no time. So someone may ask me, Guru, we are so caught up in this time dimension, it is hard to comprehend timelessness. I say, no, every day it happens to us. In the deep sleep state, though the body is going through that the time is still there ticking on the body, but you, the personality, the spirit, is not touched by time. Everything becomes oblivious, everything becomes silent. That in itself tells you that the big I is transcendental to birth and death. So here Swamiji says that that big I is transcendental to taking birth or giving birth and taking birth, or avoiding birth and taking birth. So here again, I have avoided birth or taking birth after birth, because the material body goes through this transformation, but not the spirit. Similarly, about becoming a corpse. When do we become a corpse? When we die, right? So yes, the body dies. Body dies means the body is dissolving back to its original state. That's why we call it samadhi, samma adi, right? Samma means one, adi means beginning, right? So the body goes through this transformation, which we call death, right? But the spirit does not die. The Atma doesn't die. The Paranjyoti doesn't die. The big I doesn't die. Mahan is associating himself to that. He says that no death will touch the spirit. A good example is that, the body could be amputated, but you cannot amputate the spirit. So again, he's showing that how that Mahan is anchored on this universal transcendental identity. Then he goes on to explain, at will I remain. What does that mean? Remain means I'm omnipresent, I'm omniscient, I am that infinite, that which is there in action and inaction. I'm omnipresent in everything. While the waking body is there, in the material, I am there. When the waking body is deep sleep, in the nothing state, the nothing state, I am there too. That is why we can say, hey, I had a damn good sleep. Even though everything was absent, I knew that moment that nothing was there. I was still present there. So he's speaking about at will I remain, at will I end. He says, what does that mean? I can generate that experience of this material world. I can also remove it. I have the power to awaken you, and I have the power to put you to sleep. This power is inherent in all of us. The material mind can say, I am going to stay awake. I'm going to stay awake, drink a lot of coffee and everything. Maybe a day or 2 days, but I will put you to sleep so that your body doesn't get damaged. So he says that spiritual Paranjyoti, or the big I, is that which gives us the power of cognition and the power of removing that cognition, that consciousness. So he says that at will, I have the will to remain being aware of this material world or being in that silent state. He says that, all this is possible if one understands. He says that when the mind attains that seat of wisdom. What is that seat of wisdom? He's talking about knowing and being aware that I am that big I am that universal peace sanctuary. He says that which has got the infinite potential and possibilities, that is transcendental to matter, space, time. He says that I am that. That is what all the Vakyas speak about. He says that it's spoken about in a very theoretical way, but here is a way of experiencing it through the practice of Kundalini meditation, the practice of the I God philosophy, and the deep introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, the tapas, on that vibration, the unarva, that gives us the capacity and the capability, the neural bandwidth for us to become more and more subtle, touching the core of that seed of wisdom. And this is what this quote is about. This quote tells you that one can experience the state of nothingness, the nothingness, through this deep introspection that Mahan talks about. I hope that all of you all have a better understanding of this. Every day, do your meditation, introspection, contemplation, reflection, not just in that half an hour quiet moment, but carry this quietude in in all your interactions in this material world, observe everything very carefully, listen to everything very carefully, see everything carefully, enable that inner eye to be able to assimilate everything and enlighten all your senses, your intellect, your mind to be inspired by this Paranjoti that is embedded in our DNA. And you see that if we did that, we will live to outlive everything. We will live in a very transcendental way. Sometimes when we are so caught up with things, we don't get the maximum information or the maximum, because sometimes we are too attached to things. And it's hard for us to really have an objective view. A good example is that, a heart surgeon, if he's so attached to, so emotional and so attached to the work he's doing, it's hard for him to do it. But if he goes in a very inspired way, in an independent way, and say, look, this is what I've got to do, you see that the task becomes much more easier and much more illumined. All your intellect and knowledge could be used. In that same way, every thought, every experience, every actions, use this Paranjoti, the light within you, like electron microscope, to decipher every thought, every experience, illuminate before it touches this material world. And when that illumined thought and experience, the thought that touches the material world through this illumination, you see that the experience becomes illuminated and inspirational. And when you do that, your thought that is inspired leads to, better understanding of this material universe in a more divine way. Your speech becomes more divine, your action becomes more divine, and everything that you do is divinized. And in this one quote, Swamiji says that the seat of wisdom is the seat of divinity, of divinizing everything in our lives, both the internal and the external. And I hope that, this quote that by Swamiji is inspirational for you to think about very, very carefully. What is it that you really own? You don't own anything in this material world because it is fleeting. It is transitory. What you truly own is the divine substratum, the divinity, that God, that you are. That is the only thing that you possess. And if you possess that, and if you understand that, you possess everything. There's a great saying, when the mind attains the state of nothingness, the mind attains everything. So with that, I wish you all the best, and I hope that this quote has inspired all of you all to think about your lives in a more divine and inspirational way. And I want to, show you a very nice picture that shows about death. This big eye or Atman is transcendental to this material universe, birth and death. And this is a beautiful picture that shows how this person that has died and is swallowing over the body, and Mahan tells, that which does not die is the Atman. You are that Atman, which is all pervasive. And this person who has died forgotten this, and is reminding that that body doesn't belong to you. It belongs to this material nature that is going to give you birth, and it's going to go back to the Samadhi state. What you are is that Atman that never dies, never is born, and is transcendental. This picture is to remind all of us. Of course, this Mahan is reminding the one who has passed away. But this picture is to remind all of us while living, while this body may be mortal and will be perishable and will die, this mortal body, within the mortal body, there is something immortal. Within this perishable body, there is something imperishable. Within this finite body, there is something infinite. And this Mahan is reminding us of this knowledge as how this Mahan has reminded us. Sandosham. Thank you very much.